Did you know that over 70 new laws have been passed in Australia in just the last year alone, many without public debate? And here's the kicker, some of them give the government power to monitor your online activity, control your financial access, and even limit your right to protest, all in the name of public safety or economic recovery. But what if these changes aren't really about helping Australians at all? What if there's a bigger agenda hiding in plain sight? One that benefits the powerful while slowly stripping away your rights, choices, and privacy. In this video, we're breaking down 10 shocking truths behind Australia's latest policies, the ones they don't want you to question. It's not just about politics, it's about your freedom, your future, and the real cost of staying silent. Stick around because once you see what's happening, you can't unsee it. Number 10. Law and order politics to distract from systemic issues. Picture this. Homelessness is rising, wages are stagnating, healthcare is stretched thin, and instead of fixing the root causes, the government decides to fund more police and push tougher laws on protests. Sound familiar? Australia has been witnessing a sharp rise in law and order politics, especially in the last few years. Leaders stand in front of cameras promising to crack down on crime and restore public safety. But behind the scenes, it's often a strategic distraction from deeper, systemic problems they don't want to address. While millions struggle with housing affordability and mental health access, billions are being funneled into policing budgets and private security contracts. It's a political move that plays well in headlines, but does very little to actually fix what's broken. And here's where it gets even more concerning. Peaceful protest laws are tightening. From climate marches to Indigenous land rights rallies, the space for public dissent is shrinking. In some states, simply blocking a road can now land you in jail, even if you're peacefully demonstrating. Why? Because public outrage is powerful, and silencing it is easier than facing it. This shift reflects a broader global trend, where governments are using fear-based narratives to justify crackdowns on freedoms, while leaving inequality, corruption, and economic injustice untouched. Ask yourself, who benefits when the people are quiet and the problems go unnoticed? The next time you hear a politician promise to get tough on crime, ask, which crime? And whose voice is being silenced in the process? What do you think? Are we seeing safety measures or a slow erosion of democratic rights? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if this opened your eyes, subscribe for more eye-opening content, and don't forget to share this video, because awareness is the first step toward change. Number 9. Digital ID and central bank digital currency, CBDC, trials. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that every financial move you make, every purchase, transfer, or donation is being tracked in real time, not by a hacker, but by your own government. That's the reality some experts warn could emerge from Australia's digital ID rollout and ongoing central bank digital currency, CBDC, trials. On the surface, these initiatives are marketed as secure, modern, and convenient. The digital ID promises faster services and less paperwork. The CBDC could, in theory, make payments more efficient and inclusive. But beneath the surface lies a far more controversial potential: centralized control over your identity and your money. Digital IDs, when linked across sectors, healthcare, banking, education, can form a complete profile of your life. And with that comes the risk of mass surveillance, data misuse, or even access restrictions if your profile is flagged. Now combine that with a programmable digital currency. Unlike cash, CBDCs can be programmed with rules, meaning funds could, in theory, be restricted, expire, or only be spent on approved items or in approved locations. Governments could freeze assets with a few keystrokes. While that may sound extreme, it's already happening in other countries. China, for example, is using digital currencies in tandem with social credit systems. Critics argue this kind of infrastructure could be weaponized to control behavior or suppress dissent. In Australia, these technologies are still in the trial phase, but the framework is moving quickly, and most people aren't even aware it's happening. Supporters say it's the future. Critics say it's a slippery slope toward financial authoritarianism. The big question is, are we trading privacy for convenience? As we move closer to a fully digital economy, it's not just about keeping up with the technology, it's about asking who holds the power when everything is digital and what happens if that power is abused. Number 8, trade agreements that prioritize corporations over sovereignty. When you think of trade agreements, you probably imagine economic growth, international cooperation, and more opportunities for local businesses. But what if some of these deals are actually giving foreign corporations more power than your own government? That's exactly the concern surrounding several of Australia's recent and proposed free trade agreements, especially those that include investor-state dispute settlement (ISDS) clauses. ISDS provisions allow multinational corporations to sue governments in private international tribunals if a law or policy change affects their expected profits. That means if Australia passes new environmental protections, labour laws, or public health regulations, a foreign company could challenge it as unfair and demand millions in taxpayer-funded compensation. And it's not just a theory, it's already happened. Philip Morris used ISDS to sue Australia over its plain cigarette packaging laws, arguing the rules harmed its brand value. Even though Australia eventually won, the legal battle cost taxpayers millions of dollars. These trade deals often get pushed through with little public scrutiny, and they rarely prioritise workers, small businesses, or the environment. Instead, they're designed to protect corporate interests first, with the rights of citizens and communities coming a distant second. Even worse, these tribunals operate outside the normal legal system with no public transparency, no appeals process, and arbitrators who may have financial ties to the very companies bringing the claims. It raises a fundamental question: who's really in charge, democratically elected governments or profit-driven corporations? Trade should benefit a nation, not bind it to the legal threats of wealthy multinationals. But right now, too many of these agreements are being signed behind closed doors, leaving Australians to deal with the consequences long after the cameras stop rolling. In a world of global commerce, sovereignty isn't lost all at once. It's signed away one deal at a time. Number 7, education reforms, shaping a more compliant workforce. Education is meant to empower minds, spark curiosity, and produce critical thinkers. But in recent years, Australia's education reforms seem to be drifting in a very different direction. One that prioritises obedience over originality and job readiness over independent thought. There's been a heavy push towards STEM subjects: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. On the surface, this sounds positive. After all, these fields are vital for a modern economy. But what's quietly being phased out or de-emphasised are subjects like civics, arts, history, philosophy, and ethics, fields that encourage critical thinking, social awareness, and questioning the status quo. The goal appears to be building a workforce that's technically skilled, but less likely to challenge authority or ask difficult questions. Universities are also being reshaped by funding models that favour commercial partnerships over academic freedom. Degrees that don't lead directly to high-income jobs are being priced higher, while research funding increasingly depends on private sector interests. Even the school system is becoming more standardised, with national testing regimes like NAPLAN narrowing the focus to measurable outputs rather than holistic learning. Teachers are pressured to teach to the test, leaving little room for creativity or open discussion in the classroom. The result? A generation of students trained to comply, perform, and produce, but less equipped to think critically about the systems they're entering. This isn't just an education issue, it's a societal one. When citizens are taught to memorize but not to question, to code but not to challenge, we risk building a society that is highly efficient but dangerously obedient. Ask yourself, are we educating future leaders or future workers who never question why the rules are the way they are? Number 6. Health policies driven more by budgets than public need. Australia's healthcare system has long been praised for its balance of public and private care, but in recent years, a troubling trend has emerged. Health policy decisions are being driven more by cost-cutting than by actual community needs. On paper, reforms claim to streamline services and improve efficiency. In reality, they often lead to reduced access, understaffed clinics, and increased out-of-pocket costs for everyday Australians. One clear example is the decline of bulk billing. More GPs are opting out because Medicare rebates no longer cover the real cost of a consultation. Patients are being forced to choose between getting care or saving money, especially in rural and lower-income communities. Mental health services, despite being more in demand than ever, are also under strain. Temporary COVID-era funding boosts were rolled back, leaving long waiting lists and limited session caps that don't meet real-world mental health needs. Meanwhile, public hospitals are dealing with chronic underfunding, emergency departments are overcrowded, elective surgeries face delays stretching into months, Nurses and healthcare workers are burning out, calling out systemic issues, but are often ignored. At the same time, there's a push to privatize essential services, with large corporate providers entering aged care, disability support, and even primary health. This shift turns healthcare into a profit-driven industry where bottom lines outweigh patient well-being. Even preventative care, like nutrition programs, exercise initiatives, and community outreach, is taking a back seat to budget pressures, despite evidence showing that prevention saves money in the long run. The core problem? Health is being treated as a line item, not a human right, and when governments prioritize balance sheets over bodies, the most vulnerable pay the price. Those with chronic conditions, mental health struggles, or limited access to private care. Number 5. Immigration policy tweaks that favour economic optics over human rights. Australia has long positioned itself as a multicultural nation built on immigration. But behind the headlines and political speeches, a quiet shift is taking place. Immigration policies are being fine-tuned, not for fairness or humanitarian concern, but to suit economic optics and short-term political gain. Recent policy tweaks show a clear preference for temporary visa holders over permanent migrants. These visa programs are marketed as solutions to skill shortages and economic recovery, but they often come with limited rights, lower job security, and reduced access to essential services. This creates a vulnerable class of workers, good enough to contribute, but not enough to belong. At the same time, the number of refugees and humanitarian entrants remains tightly controlled, despite global displacement reaching record levels. People fleeing war, persecution, or climate disasters face bureaucratic roadblocks, offshore detention, or prolonged processing times. Human rights organisations have repeatedly criticised Australia's approach, calling it inhumane and discriminatory. Ironically, while border protection is used as a political slogan, business-friendly migration remains quietly encouraged. International students and skilled workers bring billions into the economy, yet many live in precarious conditions with little long-term security. These policies are carefully crafted to maintain public approval, often by appearing tough on immigration while quietly fueling industries dependent on low-wage temporary labour. Even family reunification has become harder, with longer waiting periods and complex requirements, making the system feel more like a transaction than a path to belonging. In short, immigration is no longer about building a nation, it's about managing numbers to balance public perception and economic demand, and the cost? A fractured system that values profit over people, short-term wins over long-term integration, and control over compassion. Number 4. Freedom of speech, erosion through misinformation laws. In any healthy democracy, freedom of speech is fundamental. It allows people to question authority, express unpopular opinions, and hold power to account. But in Australia, a new wave of misinformation and disinformation laws is quietly reshaping that freedom, and not necessarily for the better. These laws are being introduced with the stated goal of protecting the public from false information, especially online. Sounds reasonable, right? In a world full of fake news and harmful conspiracy theories, regulation seems necessary. But here's the catch: who decides what counts as misinformation? Under some of these proposals, government bodies or appointed regulators could be given sweeping powers to flag, suppress, or remove content they deem misleading, even if it's simply critical of government policy, big corporations, or mainstream narratives. This opens the door to subjective enforcement, where legitimate dissent could be silenced under the vague umbrella of harmful information. Independent journalists, whistleblowers, and even everyday citizens posting on social media could find themselves censored, fined, or deplatformed for sharing views that challenge official positions. In some cases, algorithms may automatically reduce the visibility of content without the user ever knowing why. We've already seen cases where health policy critics or climate activists have had content removed or demonetized, not because it was dangerous, but because it didn't align with accepted messaging. This creates a chilling effect where people begin to self-censor out of fear, and when public discourse is narrowed, real accountability becomes harder to achieve. Fighting false information is important, but not at the cost of silencing uncomfortable truths or suppressing public debate. Because once we give governments the power to control the narrative, it's only a matter of time before truth itself becomes negotiable. Number 3. Real estate policies designed to protect investors, not buyers. Australia is facing one of the worst housing affordability crises in decades, yet real estate policies continue to favour wealthy investors over everyday home buyers. While politicians talk about helping first-time buyers and fixing the housing market, the reality is quite different. Behind the scenes, tax incentives like negative gearing and capital gains discounts overwhelmingly benefit those who already own multiple properties. These policies make it easier to accumulate wealth through real estate while locking many Australians out of the market entirely. The result? A system where housing is treated less like a human right and more like a stock market, driven by profit, speculation, and rising inequality. Property investors can deduct losses from their taxes, giving them a massive advantage. Meanwhile, young Australians struggle to scrape together deposits while competing against cashed-up landlords who are incentivised to buy, not live in, homes. At the same time, rental markets are becoming increasingly hostile. Skyrocketing rents, low vacancy rates, and minimal protections for tenants create a stressful environment for millions. Some states have introduced rent caps or tenancy reforms, but these are often temporary, watered down, or delayed under pressure from powerful real estate lobbies. Even affordable housing initiatives are often token efforts, small-scale pilot programs that do little to address systemic issues. Public housing stock remains critically low, and urban development policies frequently prioritise luxury apartments over livable communities. And let's not forget foreign investment. While it's tightly regulated on paper, enforcement is inconsistent and developers often cater to overseas buyers willing to pay a premium, further inflating prices. Despite the growing crisis, reform remains elusive. Why? Because those who profit from the system also help shape the policies that protect it. And until that changes, the dream of home ownership will remain just that, a dream for millions of Australians. Number 2. Corporate lobby influence in climate policy. Australia is no stranger to climate disasters. Raging bushfires, record-breaking heat waves, and devastating floods have all become alarmingly common. Yet, despite these warnings from nature, climate policy remains frustratingly weak. Why? Because behind closed doors, corporate lobbyists are writing the rules. Fossil fuel giants, coal, oil, and gas companies have poured millions of dollars into lobbying efforts, political donations, and advertising campaigns. In return, they receive subsidies, tax breaks, and regulatory loopholes that keep their industries thriving, even as the world demands a shift to cleaner energy. It's no coincidence that many government officials responsible for energy and climate policy have direct ties to the fossil fuel industry, either through past employment or future opportunities. This revolving door between politics and business ensures that corporate interests remain front and center while meaningful climate action gets sidelined. Take, for example, the approval of new coal and gas projects, even as Australia claims to be committed to net zero emissions. Environmental assessments are often fast-tracked or watered down, while communities and Indigenous groups opposing these developments are ignored or overruled. Meanwhile, renewable energy initiatives receive far less support than promised. Despite Australia having abundant solar and wind resources, policy uncertainty and funding gaps have slowed the transition. Even climate messaging is carefully managed. Terms like clean coal and gas as a transition fuel are promoted to give the illusion of progress while maintaining business as usual. Ultimately, the system is designed to appear green while staying profitable for a powerful few. This isn't just a policy failure, it's a deliberate strategy, one that protects entrenched interests at the cost of the environment, public health, and future generations. Because when corporations influence climate policy, the result isn't sustainability, it's greenwashing dressed up as leadership. Number 1. Surveillance expansion. Under the guise of national security. In the name of national security, Australia has introduced some of the most far-reaching surveillance laws in the democratic world. These laws are often passed quietly, without public debate, under the justification of protecting citizens from terrorism, cyber threats, or foreign interference. But what's really being protected? Many of these new powers grant government agencies the ability to monitor, collect, and even alter private data with minimal oversight. Under recent legislation, authorities can now hack into your devices, take control of your online accounts, and modify or delete information, all without a traditional warrant. Let that sink in. The government can access your private messages, emails, or social media accounts, and even plant or erase data, all legally. What's more, journalists and whistleblowers have increasingly come under fire. Media offices have been raided, sources intimidated, and reporting on sensitive topics treated as a threat to national security. This creates a climate where the press is less free and accountability is harder to achieve. Supporters argue that these measures are necessary to stay ahead of evolving threats, but critics warn that such unchecked power erodes civil liberties and shifts the balance of power dangerously away from the public. Many of these laws were passed swiftly, often after major security events, when fear is high and scrutiny is low, but once in place, they're rarely reviewed or rolled back. Instead, they set a precedent for more control, more monitoring, and less transparency. The danger here isn't just technical, it's philosophical, because when surveillance becomes normalized, privacy becomes optional and freedom becomes conditional. And all of it is happening under a familiar excuse. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But history shows that unchecked surveillance rarely stays in the hands of the benevolent. It becomes a tool of power, not protection. What we've uncovered in this video isn't just a list of policy changes, it's a pattern, a systematic shift in how power is used, who benefits, and who gets left behind. Whether it's surveillance disguised as security, climate action written by corporations, or economic reforms that favor the wealthy, the common thread is clear. Control is consolidating, and the everyday Australian is losing their voice in the process. These policies may seem disconnected at first, but when you look deeper, they form a strategy, one that prioritizes profit over people, optics over outcomes, and compliance over critical thought. This isn't about fear-mongering, it's about asking the right questions. Who writes the rules? Who profits from silence? And what kind of society are we allowing to take shape? Awareness is the first step. Because once you see the bigger picture, you can no longer ignore it. It's time we stop accepting headlines at face value and start demanding transparency, accountability, and real change before the choices are no longer ours to make.